Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at another Jamestown event, and we appreciate your ongoing interest in the Jamestown Foundation. We have a great event scheduled today. We have the discussion is Guardians of the Straits, Turkey's plans for a bypass canal and the future of Montreux. Many of you have been watching these announcements. On April 7th, Turkish President Recep Erdogan announced that the work would begin on the Canal Istanbul, the bypass project to the Bosphorus that would begin construction this summer. The $9.2 billion project is going to generate a lot of jobs and will run parallel to the Bosphorus. So the canal obviously has been in place with the Bosphorus, and the 1936 Montreux Convention has regulated the Straits for well over 85 years. And it's been certainly a factor that it's created stability in the Black Sea and is ongoing, but the new bypass canal has raised a lot of suspicions and concerns from external neighbors. So joining us today for your pleasure is Carlotta Gall, Istanbul Bureau Chief of the New York Times. And she is very well known among many of you who follow her writings in the New York Times and followed her writings in Afghanistan, the Caucasus, and all over. So Carlotta is a great pleasure to have her as the first speaker. And for all of you who are watching Afghanistan, I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of Carlotta's book and her Pulitzer Prize coverage of Afghanistan. The book is called The Wrong Enemy, American Afghanistan, 2001 to 2014. So she's also written a book with Tom DeWall of Chechnya called Chechnya, A Small Victorious War, published in 1996. So encourage all of you to be able to pick up a copy. Our second speaker is going to be Mitat Celikpala. Mitat is currently Vice Rector of the Kadir University in Istanbul. He's a very avid writer and observer of events in the Black Sea region, Black Sea security issues. And he's going to be speaking to us about how the bypass canal is going to affect Montreux. And our last speaker will be Matt Bryza, former U.S. Ambassador to Azerbaijan. He's also a member of the board of the Jamestown Foundation. He spent 23 years working as a U.S. diplomat and probably one of the most talented U.S. diplomats to ever work on the Karabakh War and the conflict and resolution in the region. So he's certainly been living, he currently lives in Istanbul and writes about the region very actively. He's also a senior fellow, non-resident at the Atlantic Council. So we're very delighted that he's with us. He's freshly back from a trip to the Caucasus. So he'll be able to give us some regional perspectives. So I'm going to turn the floor over to the wonderful Carlotta Gall. Carlotta, tell us what's going on and why this event last week with President Erdogan's statements about the bypass canal. What's been happening behind the scenes there inside Turkey?
So it blew up weekend before last. Erdogan has been talking about this canal for a long time. It's one of his great projects. He loves building. He builds bridges, motorways, metros, and so on. So he's talked about it a lot. I even wrote a story about it 2 years ago. But what happened 10 days ago was we had a late night letter written by retired admirals, 104 retired admirals, calling for this canal not to be carved through Istanbul, saying that it was dangerous and it would affect Turkey's security, and it was unwise because it would jeopardize the Montreux Convention. So this letter, which came out of the blue, caused a huge political rumpus. Erdogan and his political allies denounced it. Erdogan slammed it in several speeches since. And he arrested some of the admirals, 10 of them. He called in 4 more, but they weren't held because they were too elderly. So they've now been released, but under control, police control. They can't travel. So there's a prosecution going against them, and Erdogan's accused them of plotting a coup. What he's used this moment for, though, is to champion his great project of this Istanbul Canal, and he says that it's going to be greater than Suez and greater than Panama. It's going to make millions of dollars for Turkey through charging for shipping, but also real estate development, jobs, boost the economy for another decade. So it's one of these great plans that he puts out to please the party faithful and get the Turks, who are suffering from a very bad economic situation, so that there's some light on the horizon. So he's been talking it up, and he's actually used this admiral's letter to talk up his plan. And of course, that plan to build this canal and possibly to tear up the Montreux Convention has caused a huge sort of diplomatic stir across the world and the region. So we could talk further about what it means strategically and geopolitically, but that's the political scene here. He's still talking about it, and he's insisting that he will build this canal and start digging this summer. Now, we've heard these promises before, but it seems he does need something to divert the population who are suffering very serious pandemic results at the moment, very high infection rates and very tough economic straits. Does that explain a bit?
Mm-hmm.
You're on mute.
You're muted.
Sorry, yeah. And how will, what are the plans for the bypass canal, Carlotta? How will this affect the people that are living there now? I mean, and there's groups of Crimean Tatars that live there, I believe, that were resettled there from the 19th century. And who are the investors and the people being involved in this project to build the bypass canal?
Well, a lot of this is quite opaque, but certainly I've been up there. We're pretty sure the route now, and in fact, they've published the route. So it's north of Istanbul. But it's already part of the Istanbul sprawl, and it's a rather beautiful valley that goes from obviously the Black Sea to the Marmara, and it's an old waterway, but it's dammed now and almost not moving. But it's a beautiful spot, actually. And one of the things we found was exactly that, a township of Crimean Tatars who were given that land by the Sultan in the time of the Ottoman Empire and have lived there ever since. And they are, they're very worried because they're going to be moved once again. And, when you have a community that's already been displaced, even if it's way back in their history, you could see the trauma starting all over again, and they feel betrayed because this was land given them by the Sultan. There are others who are farming there, and then there's another township which is a bit of a slum. It's very, very poor working class area. They all don't have a clue what's going to happen. They haven't been told anything. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And then there's a whole stretch of land which a hacker and an investigative journalist discovered was bought by Qatari investors. And that's pretty interesting because that's obviously a real estate, gamble or investment to use or to make them building on the land around the canal, which is going to be considered a stunning, real estate proposition. So what we understand is there's going to be graded levels of the buildings you can build. So there'll be low rise immediately close to the canal and then higher rise as you get further out. So what it seems is going to be a massive new city all built around the canal. We guess some sort of Dubai or Qatar type, invention. So that's what we know. We also are very confused about the lower cities, which are actually very populated, and they will have to be moved and their homes demolished to carve the canal through the lower part, which is actually already quite densely populated. So it's going to be a huge disruption, apart from all the ecological and environmental questions. It's actually going to be population displacement and then, real estate speculation. So all of this is just speculation because we don't actually know very much of what is going to happen and who is going to be displaced yet. But the Crimean Tatars are right on the waterway, so they will definitely have to move.
But we do know that the project is going to be completed within 2 years, and that's in time for the 100th anniversary of the Turkish Republic. So that has great kind of monumental significance for Turkey as a country. What is the economic side of the benefits? I've seen that there are as much as $8 billion a year in revenue that this will bring to the Turkish economy with the bypass canal. I don't know what the figures are, but I know it's quite high, and they're looking for it as an additional benefit to help.
Yeah, well, there's great debate about this. So a lot of the opposition, almost every opposition party is against this, including the mayor, the very popular mayor of Istanbul. They say, there's no guarantee that there'll be money. For starters, there's very few foreign investors who would invest anymore in Erdogan's big projects. He did manage to raise a lot of money in the past for his metros and his bridges, but now actually he will have difficulty. So there are a lot of experts who say this might not happen because he won't raise the finance. Now there's talk that maybe China is interested with its, Belt and Road and huge transit projects. They might come in, but they haven't yet. And Qatar seems to have got involved in the real estate, but it's not clear if they would put up the money for the actual canal. And then many of the opponents of this project say it actually might not be sustainable because at the moment, the Bosporus is free for shipping. So Turkey cannot charge for it. The shipping goes through free. So who then would send a tanker through a canal and pay? Now, again, I can foresee that if there's a blockage in the Bosporus, whether it's accidental or on purpose, maybe tankers would save their money or save their time and go through the paid canal. Erdogan argues that the amount of shipping is going to increase exponentially in the future. It's going up and up, and in 10, 20, 50 years, we're going to have more and more transit goods and money. Then there's going to be a need for extra routes for the canal. But there are others who say no, because the oil tankers are dropping in number, because there are more pipelines, there's gas pipelines now through the region. So there are some who argue actually the shipping is going to drop. But what I notice Erdogan would really love to do is he would love to close off the Bosporus to make that a purely touristic pleasure boat area and have the shipping go through the paid route. So, he kind of controls things a lot here, so he might be able to do that. The same with the funding. He might, be able to pull something out of the hat and get it going. But he has repeatedly said, we are going to start building it, and we have not seen it started yet. So this is all still up in the air in my feeling.
Well, thank you very much, Carlotta. We're now going to shift to our Turkish speaker, Mitat Celikpala, the Vice Rector. Mitat, you notice that this is going to have a strategic significance and will affect Montreux in some ways, but kind of tell us what your perspectives are on this. And the bypass canal is supposed to be 35 meters in depth, which is not capable of large warships of passing through. So the Turkish government and Erdogan has been saying that this is not going to affect things with Montreux. So what are your perspectives on what's going on, and shed some light too on what happened with all these admirals who were signing letters and announcing it early in the morning through Turkish press? What's going on there?
Okay, thank you, Glenn. It's also my pleasure to be with you, all those attendees. Let me try to clarify a little bit Turkish position and the discussions in Turkey after Carlotta's introduction. And that's true. Canal Istanbul is a planned kind of an artificial waterway, alternative or parallel to the Istanbul Strait or Bosphorus. The idea or aim is to ship traffic, to reduce the ship traffic and minimizing the risk of accidents in the Istanbul Strait. This is the main argument, in fact, by the government, and Erdogan today repeating himself with this argumentation as well. With this channel, the Bosphorus will possibly, or at least there is an intention in the government, be completely closed to tanker traffic, while 2 new peninsulas and the new islands will be created in the Istanbul region. From this perspective, this is a kind of a real estate development project with the participation of course, Qataris and some other actors as well, Chinese or South Africans, or any other Europeans and who would like to invest this project is more than welcome. And the target is, as you said, the 100th anniversary of the Republic, in fact, in 2 years' time. And President Erdogan declared his intention to construct the canal as a maritime route to Istanbul Straits first in 2012, 11 or something, almost 10 years ago. And the debate about the Montreux Convention has grown afterwards. And to say my conclusion at the beginning, I believe that Montreux Convention will not binding for Canal Istanbul. And again, from my perspective, the new canal will not change the regime in Turkish Straits as well. Nevertheless, I have to admit that through Canal Istanbul, Montreux is also opened up for discussion, even at the planning stage. Then this is the reason why we have such a kind of a discussion domestically and internationally, regionally as well. And again, this is why we have some kind of a solid criticisms, domestic criticisms in Turkey and quick response from Moscow. And we are discussing this issue in the US as well. And the Montreux Treaty concerns only the Straits. And since it's not a natural passage, I mean, Canal Istanbul will be a kind of man-made channel or a waterway. And therefore, this is not a strait. And for this reason, it is essential to consider some key points very carefully. There is a common point in all of the government statements, Erdogan's statements, and all of them stated that Montreux will remain valid and the Canal Istanbul is independent from this treaty, but there is no clear explanation for which ships this canal will be opened, under what conditions, etc. This is the point that Carlotta raised. How can you prevent some ships to pass through the Istanbul Strait and to direct them to this channel is a big question mark. But Erdogan says there are some ways and means. What is the matter? Why this became a hot topic last couple of days or weeks, let me say. The first criticisms by retired Turkish admirals and diplomats beforehand warning the government not to open up for debates a key international treaty managing Turkey's major waterways has created a kind of a controversy in Turkey. This is a big discussion because, you know, 104 retired admirals, as you mentioned, released an online letter warning the government against amending the convention at midnight on April the 3rd. And this is a kind of a communicative failure, in fact, because of the midnight reminds us many issues like the Montreux Convention reminds Turks many historical events. Therefore, this was a kind of an accident, let me say. But, you know, it means something. And Erdogan's response, you remember, and he said, in quote, maybe I can read it if I can see. Yes, he says, this is act done at midnight is definitely an ill-intentioned attempt. The duty of retired admirals is not releasing declarations that include coup implications. And Akar, the Minister of Defense, said it was clear that the declaration would only please the enemies of Turkey. Therefore, it turns out to be a kind of a domestic political issue in a minute. Then afterwards, Erdogan made a statement again, and he said Turkey will be committed to the Montreux Convention on the Turkish Straits until it finds a better one. And this makes all those admirals and of course ambassadors hesitant. What does it mean? It finds a better one. How can you read or write a new agreement under current circumstances? This is a big issue. Then comes, of course, American and Russian responses to this kind of a change. And then to clarify the Turkish mind, let me give some clues on the Montreux Convention and the priority, why Turks are so precious, takes it very seriously and don't want to touch upon this Montreux Convention. And you know, the Montreux Convention is the international treaty regulating the status of the Turkish Straits. And together with the Lausanne Peace Agreement of 1923, Turkey regards the Montreux Convention as one of the main pillars of Republican national sovereignty. And this is very important for Turkish state and the apparatus. And therefore, Montreux is a kind of a byproduct of the Lausanne Peace Agreement. And while Lausanne demilitarized Istanbul and Çanakkale Straits, Bosporus and Dardanelles, in another way, Straits completely, the Montreux Convention allowed the Turkish army to reclaim its positions in this strategic area. And this is the case. And the convention gives Turkey a complete control of the Turkish Straits, guarantees the free passage of civilians vessels in peacetime, and permits Turkey to remilitarize the Turkish Straits. And since then, Montreux Convention has been an essential element of the Black Sea security, and for Turkish perspective, it's a source of stability in the region, in peacetime and in wartime decades. And therefore, we are prioritizing it. And by the Straits, I mean, I have to clarify myself. Straits means not only Istanbul Strait or the Bosphorus, but it includes the Marmara Sea and the Dardanelles or Çanakkale Strait as well. Therefore, such a kind of a new canal do not affect the Montreux spirit. In fact, this is the discussion. There is another discussion, for example, currently in Turkey to construct another channel or canal to bypass the Dardanelles via Marmara Sea to the Aegean. This is also does not affect the convention, because the convention comprises not only two straits but the Marmara Sea as well. As I've said, according to the convention, and this is the point Carlotta raised, in fact, merchant vessels, whether riparian or non-riparian, enjoy the freedom of passage through the Turkish Straits. There's a freedom of it. And this is the priority. And this is the reason why many people are discussing that how and why you are forcing the other ships or the people, and especially the civilian vessels, to pass through the canal, because there is a regulation. Turkish Strait Vessel Traffic Service Center is dated 1998, and there was a big discussion in those days with Turkey and Russia as well, how to apply this kind of a regulation. And this is the case. And your point, and the most important point, most probably the American and other non-literal partners or actors involving in the region, or at least interested in the region, is the passage of warships and the vessels of war. And this is the case for Turkey as well, because they are all under a kind of they are subject to strict limitations, which vary depending on whether these vessels belong to the Black Sea riparian or not. This is the first limitation. Besides, there are some general restrictions applicable to all. The transit of warships of non-Black Sea riparian states is subject to restrictions on type, tonnage, and the duration of stay in the Black Sea. And the Turkish authorities must be notified through the diplomatic channels beforehand. Not only the riparians, but non-riparians are also have to notify Turkey beforehand. This is the thing that makes Montreux Convention unique or special for Turkish decision makers, let me say, officials. I don't want to go into details, but for aircraft carriers and for the submarines, there are some strict limitations because of the mindset of these 1930s or 40s. And of course, there are some exceptions, but I don't want to go into the detail, depending on the questions, and I may try to clarify myself. In the past, Russia, the historical nemesis of Turkey, held dim view of this Montreux Convention. At the end of it is not easy for everyone to make happy. Russians also questioning this Montreux Convention in 40s, 50s, and 60s, and depending on their position. But you know, this is a complicated issue. Under Soviet Union, it worked, but especially during 1990s, especially 2000s, it worked to create a kind of a policy for Turkey towards the Black Sea region. You remember or Matthew most probably touch upon this issue, the regional ownership scheme of Turkey up until 2008. It worked, and Turkey managed to establish some kind of mechanisms to control the passage and the security in the Black Sea region as a NATO member country in this area. But of course, the Georgian war and what happened in Crimea and all those Donbass issues made everything much more complicated. And this is the reason, and now we are just discussing this issue. Some concluding remarks. Yeah, please, Glenn.
Yeah, well, I mean, and please, the Russian ambassador made a comment last week that that when this announcement was made about the bypass canal by President Erdogan, the Russian ambassador in Turkey made a statement that they were not concerned. They were happy, they're okay with the bypass canal, basically. Is that pretty much true? Have you seen any more reaction from the Russian side?
Yeah, this is the reason they don't care. It is not related with the Montreux Convention. This is the Russian perspective as well. This is a kind of a canal developed by Turkey for some other reasons, to make money or to secure Istanbul, but most probably they may vocal when Turkey forced them to change the passage through the Istanbul Strait. If it is the case, then they most probably remind Turkey that there is a kind of an agreement, and Montreux allows all those civilian merchant ships freely passage. But there are other big issues, and for Russians, the priority is to prevent any kind of a military vessel or naval ships to enter the Black Sea region. They try to prevent it, and this is the reason they are showing a kind of a power in the region, and they are using the Black Sea as a power projection towards the Eastern Mediterranean as well. Now, most of those Black Sea flotilla or Black Sea ships of Russians now serving in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this is the reason they moved to this Caspian flotilla to the Black Sea to support their force over there. But let me just conclude my points with some clues from this perspective. To repeat myself, the new canal will not change the regime in the Straits. Instead, the government estimates that it will provide Turkey with new diplomatic leverage by giving discretion on the right of passage in the Istanbul Canal to the Turkish government. And this is the question mark. How can you play this card against those Black Sea littorals to make money? And this is a huge discussion. And apart from these strategic calculations, Erdogan seeks public support by emphasizing the environmental danger that maritime passage poses for Istanbul city. And this is one of those cracks points. Roughly speaking, 360 million tons of cargo annually passes through the Straits. And this includes crude oil and chemical compounds. Apart from these frequent ship accidents, the damaged properties along the Bosphorus or Istanbul Straits, the 1979 incident, the fire on the Independent, a Romanian tanker, many people reminds this issue. It was a crude oil ship, as remembered, as an unforgettable ecological nightmare for many Istanbul inhabitants. This is a discussion from this perspective that I have to remind. But there are other big question marks. Carlotta mentioned to move the people from the area that they are living. There are others that we have to take into consideration. What kind of developments, for example, ecological considerations, maybe a kind of a legitimate rationale for constructing a new canal. Many environmental activists are against it because of damage. It's going to damage ecosystem. They are going to remove some dams and lakes over there. And this has some direct effects on the Marmara Sea as well, resulting in fish and other underwater species death. This is another concern. And there is just one point. This project questionable from the economic perspective as well. According to the feasibility studies, the Istanbul Canal's construction costs, as you mentioned in your point, approximately 10 billion US dollars. Who's going to sponsor? Who's going to invest this amount of money? This is the reason why we are hearing Gulf money as well as some Chinese and the others. There are other projects and discussions, for example, how to let LNG ships. They are not allowed to pass through to support Ukraine or other Black Sea countries against Russia to pass those LNG ships towards the Istanbul. They are not allowed now. If it is possible in the future, we don't know. And the last point, the number of ships passing through the Straits is decreasing year by year because of, as Carlotta mentioned, pipelines and in sanctions on Russia. They are selling less and less amount of energy resources, and they are using other transmitting mechanisms. Therefore, the number of ships are decreasing last decade. Therefore, we do not expect any kind of an increase in number. And then at the end, we will have most probably new discussions in Turkey regarding this canal project. But if Turkey or any other actor would like to change the convention, there are ways and means, but I don't want to discuss at that point. I think I tried to cover all those issues.
Well, I think you did. And I think that in the background of the announcement last week, we can see that many of the world shipping companies have major hangovers from what happened in the Suez Canal being blockaded for several weeks. And I think that a lot of people are kind of thinking about the future of world maritime transport and what happens again if the Suez has another major catastrophe. And certainly we don't know yet, but the background, we do see the Chinese with the Belt and Road Initiative trying to use Turkey and Central Asia as major railroad and transportation corridors to Europe. So I think in President Erdogan's mind, in the back of his mind, he's seeing this from a revenue perspective as we use regional choke points. So I'm going to turn the floor over to our Matt Bryza, who's going to discuss what does it mean for the United States and how does the canal, the bypass canal, affect U.S. strategic thinking? I mean, obviously, we're seeing what's happening with another flare-up in the Black Sea and Russian threats against Ukraine. So obviously, Montreux remains really relevant. And you have, Matt, you've had a lot of firsthand experience from the 2008 war with issues related to Montreux. And so, Matt, please share your thoughts on this important issue.
Yeah, thanks, dear Glenn. Yeah, and it's great to be together with Carlotta and Mitat. And yeah, I mean, Carlotta is one of the most legendary war correspondents that has ever existed. And yeah, I just came back from the South Caucasus and she's written so much about it, including about the Karabakh War. So I'm really happy to be connected right now with you, Carlotta. Yeah, I will come to that in a moment. Let me react a little bit to what's been said to provide a context. And then that'll lead right into my comments on the Russian invasion of Georgia and the role that Montreux played. And I'm wondering if I'm frozen. Am I frozen? No, I'm okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Good.
Okay, good. Out here in the forest, we get some connectivity problems. Yeah, and by the way, I mean, where I live, where my family lives, is quite close to the route. And we live in a beautiful forest. And this is really, except for the airport that's nearby, pretty pristine land. And as I was landing today, or my plane was landing from Azerbaijan, I took a long look at the estuary that would be the main sort of initial part of this canal. And it's like, that is a fragile ecosystem. And as Carlotta was saying, like when you open up the dams and okay, maybe it's good if the water flows naturally, but there are going to be all kinds of consequences that will be quite disruptive. Leave that aside. I think this, like many big policy decisions, there are a lot of reasons why any one of those is taken. In any country, in my experience working in the U.S. government, I could see that a multiplicity of interests need to be satisfied to get a huge decision like either building Canal Istanbul when you've got a lovely waterway, a few miles to the east that's functioning just great. And as Mitat was just saying, and as Carlotta said, the volume of shipping traffic, at least of hydrocarbons, is going down. And then also to take a decision to walk back from the Montreux Convention, because in my mind, in the Turkish psyche, Montreux is part of the whole complex of post-World War I agreements, well, like Lausanne, that got Turkey away from, in the Turkish mind, being taken advantage of. as under the Treaty of Sèvres, which would have broken up the Ottoman Empire in ways that Turkish people would have found to be highly disadvantageous. So Montreux is part of the follow-on set of agreements. And so the admirals, in part, are motivated by that, the sense that Montreux is a way that Turkey is given international respect and control over its straits. So you know, at one level, you don't want to mess with that. So that's the first sort of element that has to be overcome in coming up with a policy decision to go ahead with either the Canal Istanbul and or walking away from the Montreux Convention. So why? Why is this all happening? I agree with both Carlotta and Mitat that a huge motivator is economic. And that Canal Istanbul is overwhelmingly a real estate development project. And yes, it's about the Gulf, about Qataris and others. I mean, all over Istanbul, there's a huge amount of Gulf investment that is near water, whether it's near the Bosporus. I had lunch last week at a spectacular new hotel right on the Bosporus, Qatari funded, or whether it's more inland, actually coincidentally near where this Canal Istanbul would run, where there are all sorts of skyscraper apartment buildings that have been built that have, you know, artificial pools and streams that again are being bought by and invested in by Arab investors and Gulf investors who want to get close to the water. So there's a lot of money to be made. And about, well, I suppose 2 years ago, I had a discussion with one of the people who is trying to be one of the major real estate investors in the project. And I said, how in the world are you going to generate any revenue from Canal Istanbul if ships can travel through the Bosporus and the Dardanelles for free? And his response was, yeah, that's a good point. I guess the Montreux Convention needs to expire, but it doesn't expire, right? So you're not going to be able to finance these real estate investments unless you can generate revenue, because nobody, like the Turkish government or EBRD, they're not just going to pump money into real estate, speculative real estate investments along this new Canal Istanbul. You have to have a revenue stream that will allow financial institutions, banks, to say, okay, I think these loans will be repaid. If Montreux exists, there's no way you can generate that revenue, right? Because everybody else who is going to go through the Bosporus for free rather than through Canal Istanbul. So that's the major reason why I think there's been this suggestion of walking away from Montreux. And then the whole issue got politicized here as Carlotta was discussing, and with the government here talking about the possibility that this might be part of a coup attempt. And that's just playing, I think, into the whole domestic political narrative here with an early election probably likely. But leave that aside. I don't want to overcomplicate it. Now, finally, I can go to your question, Glenn. There are huge positive implications to NATO of having the Montreux Convention no longer in place. This is a very controversial thing I'm saying, I know it, and it makes a lot of traditional Turkish thinkers uncomfortable, especially the 104 admirals, because they're rightfully, understandably nationalists. And as I said in the beginning of my intervention, they see Montreux as part of this framework of post-World War I agreements that recognize Turkey's sovereignty and the modern Turkey, the Turkish Republic, the post-Ottoman Turkey's relevance on the international stage. That's really important. But I also know that several of those admirals, many of them, are from the so-called Eurasian school of Turkish national security policy, which says that Turkey's rightful place in the world is not necessarily in the transatlantic community with this big, brash United States generating tension with Russia. Russia, the country with which Turkey has fought more wars than any other country, going back to the Ottoman period, and maybe only one of them. No, we need to try to keep the US and the non-riparian NATO navies out of the Black Sea, because we don't want to antagonize Russia too much, because that hasn't worked out for us so well in our historical past. So I think that was the genesis of the letter. And then the letter became politicized internally in Turkey, which is to be expected. So, okay, with that context, yeah, the the Montreux Convention created some real complications for the United States in August of 2008, while Russia's invasion of Georgia was ongoing. And the tonnage limitation today is way lower than for an aircraft carrier. Mitat mentioned the special provisions for aircraft carriers, but it's 30,000 tons. And so the United States wanted to bring a ship into the Black Sea to support Georgia and to send a message of deterrence to Russia, the USS McFall, and it was overweight. It was over 30,000 tons, and that was the one that was having to go in for all sorts of military logistical reasons. And so Turkey adhered to the Montreux Convention, and even though it was and is a huge supporter of Georgia and Georgia's NATO membership, it said, look, we have to abide by our commitment and we can't let this ship through. So without going into too much detail, things had to happen. The ship had to be lightened. And finally, after several days of delay, was allowed into the Black Sea. And then it ended up, going, I think it went to Poti and sent a very sharp signal to Moscow that don't mess around. We're here. We're not threatening you. This is not a ship that is going to provide any sort of offensive capability. It's one ship, but symbolically, it's a good sized ship, and don't mess with us. And I think that really had a strong deterrent impact. So that my next point then was that Montreux retarded. It made it harder for the United States to come to the aid of Georgia in solidarity with all of our allies. But Montreux didn't prevent it. But the point is that Montreux does limit and reduce the ability of NATO or non-riparian states to get their vessels into the Black Sea and counter what has been a massive buildup of Russia's capabilities within the Black Sea. I mean, we talk about it all the time, Glenn. The modernization of the Black Sea fleet, which was a shambles at the end of the Soviet Union, and it now is not, and as it's moving all over the place beyond the Black Sea, and also in terms of what Russia has done in Crimea since it invaded and annexed it, with its massive buildup in military forces, both terrestrial and maritime. So as we all know, Russia's ambition seems to be to create a situation of anti-access aerial denial for NATO in the Black Sea. And if NATO's non-riparian naval vessels are limited in their ability to counter that in the Black Sea, that very much serves Russia's advantage to create a dominant position in the Black Sea. And so that gets back to the very beginning of what Russia has been moving, as we know, forces on land across the bridge over the Kerch Straits, right, into formerly Ukrainian territory. It's had 40,000 troops exercising and deployed along the border of Ukraine. We're all trying to figure out what Russia's objectives are, but the more that something like the Montreux Convention limits NATO's ability to deploy in the Black Sea, the more likely it is that Russia is going to accelerate and deepen those sorts of provocative and potentially decisive deployments of its own military forces in the region. So to wrap up, I absolutely, from a historical perspective, totally appreciate how important Montreux is for Turkey's sovereignty over the Straits and understand why those 104 admirals did what they did. I think it's also important to approach this from a broader strategic perspective, from not just Turkey's angle, but all of NATO's. And if Montreux were to be somehow modified, that could be really to the advantage of the rest of the NATO alliance. Thanks.
Well, Matt, I mean, isn't this recent announcement more about Turkey in 1936 is not the Turkey of today? In other words, in 1936, Turkey was not a regional power. It was a country wedged between other great powers in trying to survive and get by. And so with the announcement of the bypass canal, I mean, isn't this really a statement that Turkey is now really fully emerging as a regional power in the Black Sea and signaling its importance to the West and to NATO?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great summing up of what I was trying to say. Yes, absolutely. Turkey doesn't feel it needs to rely on that crutch anymore of Montreux, and then can do something new. I don't think the driving factor is to do the new strategic thing that you and I are hoping it is, which is to, enable NATO to be able to counter Russia's increasingly aggressive posture in the Black Sea. I think this is all driven by more venial objectives, like generating a lot of revenue from the real estate development and from being financed by the transit fees. But nonetheless, yes, I agree. Turkey's more confident now, and therefore it can be more creative, whether it's looking for revenue streams or hopefully doing something that is more broadly strategically in NATO's interests.
There was some speculation about Zelensky's visit to Turkey recently, and President Erdogan met with Zelensky. And one of those reportedly side conversations was Zelensky was going to bring up the idea of LNG, of signing an LNG deal with between Qatar and between Ukraine, and whether that Erdogan would permit LNG tankers to go through the new bypass canal. That would be a major game changer in the Black Sea, as Romania also is very interested in LNG, and it would change things. I mean, what do you make of those reports, and how would this situation affect things? And Mitat, if you have something to say, please weigh in, and as well as Carlotta.
Yeah, during the last few years, I've spent a lot of time talking to Turkish officials and Ukrainian ones about the possibility of getting LNG tankers through the Straits. And Turkey has always, it's just resisted it, right? Because of, or claiming that it's too dangerous. I mean, the reality is, I've observed or commissioned a lot of analysis into this when I was in the US government. It's really hard to blow up an LNG ship. So I think that there was a negotiation going on, the Turkish government looking for leverage and not wanting to give up its ability to regulate in some way transit through the Turkish Straits, whether it's for sovereignty reasons or economic ones. But I don't know how the Turkish government would react to requests for LNG tankers to move through Canal Istanbul. There's still a calculus going on beneath the surface that I don't fully understand. But I think that the recent discoveries of natural gas in Turkey's sector of the Black Sea provides a totally new and different option. I mean, that gas could be piped to Ukraine and to Romania as well. So I think none of this has been worked out yet. And the decisions are being made on the fly. And LNG through the Canal Istanbul could be something else, because my area of Istanbul, I'm looking out my window, it's just right over here, is not so populated, other than those areas Carlotta talked about. It's not like going through the heart of Istanbul. So presumably, yeah, it could be safer. It could be safer to move LNG tankers through Canal Istanbul. But I don't know the latest on what the Turkish government's thinking about that. And Mitat and Carlotta probably know more.
Yeah, may I add some issues from this strategic view? When Russians look at the south, in fact, via the Black Sea, they see NATO member countries, including Turkey. Therefore, this is a threat perception for Russians, and this is the reason why most of the time they are questioning Turkey's strategic value for themselves. Why Turkey? And those Eurasianist admirals and those discussions is very fashionable in Turkey, but those admirals, most probably there are among some Eurasianist or pro-Russian, pro-Chinese policy preferences you may easily find, especially after those FETÖ movement, but other related issues. But they are prioritizing Turkey's position and Montreux just because to prevent Turkey for any kind of and how can I say clashes between the big powers. For those Turkish authorities, Montreux, as Matthew and Carlotta mentioned as well, prevents Turkey from any kind of a clash between the great powers. this is the perspective. And I remember, as Matthew mentioned, in 2008, Turkey was very criticized by American fellows just because of this USS Comfort and Mercy. But beyond that, there are other projects emerged. We discussed with you as well, Glenn, in those days. I remember, for example, how to expand the capability and capacity of NATO littorals. Now, currently, for example, Romania and Bulgaria as well, NATO member countries. And Georgia and Ukraine has a perspective to have a NATO membership. That makes Russia alone in this area or the Black Sea region, and that makes Russians very aggressive from this perspective. And this is also another issue. And there was some scenarios, for example, reflagging non-Black Sea NATO members' warships with Romania and Bulgaria, and even the Turkish flag to support navies to balance or to corner Russian Navy. But, you know, in Turkey, we have a kind of a memory of 1914, German warships eventually triggering the Ottoman Empire's entry into the World War I. And this idea will unlikely to go down well with the either Turkish decision makers or the public. And we have other kind of memories. This is the reason why Turkey looks a kind of a traditional actor in terms of Montreux Convention, but it serves the reason. And currently, for example, as I said, Black Sea littorals are all NATO member countries, with an exception of Russia. You may add Georgia and Ukraine as a partner countries as well. And therefore, any kind of increase of a kind of a possibility of a clash makes everything much worse. And this is also will negatively affect NATO. You know, if Turkey or another NATO member country in the Black Sea region have a kind of a threat beyond the threat by Russia, then it means a serious issue for NATO member countries. For this energy topic, this is too much important. We have an experience of this Russian shutdown of this Russian fighter jet in Syria, you remember. Then afterwards, Turkey faced with a kind of sanctions or the series of sanctions. And this has some direct effect on Turkey to change its energy policy. Now this Turkey's dependency on Russia is decreasing day by day. And Turkey is playing with Russia, that's true. But, you know, alternatives are on the table in different ways and means. And the current government in Turkey is a kind of a different mindset to negotiate each and every issue from the perspective of a businessman. And this is the reason why we are discussing this kind of a real estate development project and the others. But in terms of security, that's right. It is not 1930s or 40s. Turkey is much stronger comparing with the previous Turkey of 1930s. But, you know, the balance in the region has changed much. And we have an experience last couple of years. Capacity and capability. Turkey's foreign policy decisions time to time create some serious problems to Turkey. In South, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Caucasus, and some other areas. The capability and capacity and your expectations. There must be a kind of a balance, and the bill is so high. And this is the reason, most probably, this is turned out to be a kind of a domestic issue as well. We are discussing domestically this Montreux and the Canal Istanbul issue from a different perspective than the external related or the foreign related issues.
Thank you, Mitat. We have a question from the audience from Margarita Sienova, who's asking a question about where would military ships to and from the Black Sea be going, passing through if the Istanbul bypass canal is built and the Bosphorus Straits, and if the Bosphorus Straits become tourism areas only. So it's my understanding from everyone that the bypass canal will be used for civilian traffic, and then the Bosphorus will still be used for military traffic. Is that, are we?
But, you know, this is a kind of a confusion. We don't know how the Turkish government regulates the passage of ships under this canal if they manage to construct a Canal Istanbul. But as I said before, it is non-related with this Montreux Convention. Montreux Convention regulates the passage of warships under some conditions. The only way is to change the Montreux Convention, and it is not easy to change the Montreux Convention. You know, this is the limitation. Of course, this is an agreement of 1936, but you have to change the Montreux Convention with the participation of all those signatories. And this is not an easy topic. It cannot be eliminated unilaterally. It is not Turkey's capacity. It is not the other littorals' capacity, or it is not a capacity for the US. The abolition or amendment of the contract is only possible with the decision of the parties signing the contract to come together. And this is the reason why it is almost an impossible mission to bring all those parties together to change the Montreux Convention, because parties' expectations and interests are much more different than each other. And then how can you play such a kind of a game? And this is the reason why admirals and some other groups are very critical of the Turkish government, because, you know, Turkish government is just started this discussion by its own hands, not the Americans, not the other littoral states, but the Turkish government itself. And this is the reason why they signed and issued this letter. This is the discussion. I'm not totally agree with those guys, but, you know, we need to discuss this issue both domestically and with our allies as well, including the Americans, all those NATO member countries, as well as Russians. We know who's going to pay the bill, not only Turkey, but other littorals as well. If we face with Russia in a harsh condition, and most probably this is gonna be a kind of a burden on NATO member countries as well. And this is the reason why we have those joint projects last 2 decades. This is true. All those projects or regional projects collapsed down just because of Russian aggression. This is the case.
Now, we have a question from someone watching, Samina Solanu, who's asking, will the Istanbul Canal comply to the Montreux Convention? And that's her question. And I just use this moment to emphasize that the Erdogan government has said that Montreux won't be affected by the bypass canal because the bypass canal will be limited to 35 meters in depth. So therefore, it's not deep enough to accommodate warships. And therefore, they all still have to keep using the Bosphorus as the main channel for warships to be going back and forth between the Black Sea and the Med. So if that is the case, then Montreux still exists and nothing changes. What's your response?
That's true, but the idea is to play with the Montreux Convention through these civilian ships, and then no one knows what's the response of Russians and the others towards such a kind of an implementation. Then they may start to discuss Montreux Convention. And what Turkey or some groups in Turkey is against, they do not want to discuss the Montreux or any clause of Montreux because they see a kind of a package. And they don't want to leave this package aside. And more than that, we are going to make some huge investment to such a kind of a project. If it's going to be a kind of a debt project under current economic conditions, then who is going to pay the bill? Turkish taxpayers. And this is the concern. And therefore, we are discussing this issue. And for some people, like Eurasianists or Republicanists, questioning Montreux means questioning Turkey's secular Republican state. We have some imagination and we have some history. Therefore, this is the reason why we are in need of or availing of Turkey's domestic politics to understand all those discussions. Why some Turkish people or some groups are very harshly against such a kind of a discussion. They are of course, all of them are aware of Turkey's capacity, power, and Turkey's location as a regional power. But you know, repercussions are so huge, and if it affects not only one issue but the other issues as well. It's a complicated package, and we have just a kind of a balance, for example, with Russia in the Caucasus, in Syria, in Iraq, in Eastern Mediterranean, then now in Ukraine. As you mentioned, Zelensky was here last weekend, And Erdogan and the Minister of Defense also suggested that we are supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. And we are just supplying some kind of drones like we supplied in Azerbaijan. And most probably Ukrainian authorities are using those drones against separatist groups in Donbass. And this is a concern for Russia. You know, we are living in a kind of a tightrope, and each and every issue are linked to each other. And if you touch one of those issues under the current circumstances, it's going to be beyond Turkey's capacity and capability. You have to be act in Libya, in Syria, in Nagorno-Karabakh, and in the Black Sea and in Ukraine. Then it's going to be a big issue. And this is the mindset that they are against such a kind of an argumentation.
Well, I think that Turkey has walked that tightrope very carefully. You know, after the meeting with Zelensky, Erdogan picked up the phone and called Putin. Said,
Before,
hey, Vlad, I just had a meeting.
Yeah.
Just had a meeting with Zelensky. So you know, don't freak out. You know, we're talking about territorial integrity of Ukraine, but you know, Turkey keeps walking that. So
can I jump in? Carlotta might want to say something because she was the first one, but I feel very strongly about this. Turkey is relevant in the world today, at least in Washington, if it can constrain Russia's aggressiveness in the Black Sea. If it can't do that, it's not valuable to NATO. So the admirals, whoever else, who are all worried about Russia getting all spun up, are wrong. They're wrong. Look at what happened in Georgia in August of 2008. Russia invaded. It has essentially annexed South Ossetia and has occupied Abkhazia, so 20+% of Georgia. On August 18th of 2008, I think it was, Sarkozy, then president of France, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, and he said, yeah, it's bad what happened just now, you know, with Russia invading Georgia. Ooh, we don't like it. But, you know, we really have to throw down the gauntlet if Russia does something to Ukraine. And Saakashvili said about the same time, this happened in Georgia, Crimea is next. Both were right. But Sarkozy was looking for a way to kind of say, let's not antagonize the Russians at this point. Russia is as aggressive as can be in the Black Sea. And if we back off now and are worried that we're going to upset it, it's just going to bite off more and more and more. And all these forces that have been deployed across the Kerch Strait that we've talked about so many times, Glenn, and then the 40,000 troops on the border of Donbass and Russia, Putin's going to be empowered to use them unless it's clear that Turkey is not going to play into Russia's attempt to split Turkey from the rest of NATO and use our fear of antagonizing Russia and prompting a mean Russian response as a way to get us to back off. So my point is that, what Erdogan is doing maybe is saying that the warships are going to keep on moving through the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, yes? And then he wants to channel commercial traffic through Canal Istanbul. But if there's not a way for NATO to increase its naval presence in the Black Sea, tension is going to increase. If we're not ready to say, Russia, stop. As Mitat said, Mitat said that the littoral states of the Black Sea are essentially NATO and NATO partners outside of Russia. And if we're not willing to take a stand there, then what does that mean for the Baltic states? You know, things really risk unraveling. So there's multiple complexities to this question that go way beyond let's not antagonize Russia.
Well, we have a question from Deborah Kagan, who's asking, hasn't Russia used and abused the conventions before to its own benefit, to an ongoing detriment of the West? And I would echo that by saying that also that Turkey has accommodated Russia by, for example, twice it's allowed aircraft carriers to go through the Bosporus. Once in 1978 with the Kiev-class aircraft carrying cruiser, and again in the 1990s when it let the Kuznetsov go through on its way from Ukraine to China, or not the Kuznetsov, the other former. So is it this, what Deborah's question is doesn't Russia have a tendency to kind of abuse this?
Yeah, at least one instance, as you mentioned, Ankara accepted the formal Russian declaration of Kuznetsov a heavy aircraft carrier cruiser rather than an aircraft carrier. It's allowed her to transit the Turkish Straits, hoping that she would never return to the Black Sea. This was the case, and we don't know, especially the passage of all those submarines and others. They are prevented, and they have to notify initially. As for example, only the Black Sea riparian submarines may transit the Straits to rejoin their base in the Black Sea for the first time and after their construction, or how can I say, purchase or repair in dockyards outside of the Black Sea. There are many limitations, but most probably there are some breaches as well. But, you know, Turkey accepts all those notifications most of the time. Yeah. If the parties notify those ships and the others as one of those, under the definition of one of those limitations, then Turkey accepts it. But, you know, breaking the agreement creates some negative effects for all those regional actors. This is the main perspective. And what I'm trying to say, that it's possible to get rid of Montreux. Then what kind of a regime are you going to put in effect? Many people in Turkey now defending that Turkey has a power and potential to declare and to define all those regimes through the Straits. But many do not believe in such a kind of an attitude, do not believe that the conditions may easily change under current circumstances. This is the big discussion. This is the reason why I'm saying that it's a domestic discussion in Turkey. Therefore, it's not easy to understand. Of course, Turks are not very happy. The Russian buildup in the Black Sea region. We were very happy, for example, in 1990s or early 2000 for a decade, because, you know, Turkish Navy was the top Navy in the Black Sea area. And we are serving as a NATO patrol in all those areas. But now, you know, new threats. What's happening in Aegean with the EU? What's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean with Israel and Greece and, of course, Cyprus? What's happening in Syria, Glen? Therefore, the area or the threat is so high. And this is the reason why many people are very critical or questioning the position. Russians are abusing it. That's true. I'm not fan of Russian in all those regions, you know, but, you know, how to balance what Turkey become a kind of a NATO member country to balance Russia in 50s and 60s. Still, NATO membership is very crucial thing for Turks. And this is the reason why Turkish Navy is serving in the Baltics. And Turkey is most probably one of the main actors to defend NATO's both East and South. Yep. These are the facts. The Russians see Turkey from this lenses as well. Our problem is with our NATO member allies. This is a big question mark now.
Well, I completely agree with you. And I think too often in Washington, the view is that Turkey is a part of the problem and they're not part of the solution. And I think they get it completely the opposite. Turkey has to be part of the solution just by looking at a map and looking at geography. So we're certainly, you know, we're all concerned about what's happening, but it's also Turkey's been able to balance these developments with Russia, the 44-day war in Karabakh. Azerbaijan was supported by Turkey, and Armenia was alone basically at the hands. Russia didn't intervene. So the world is changing in many ways. That Turkey is becoming more of a regional power. Carlotta, do you have any comments or any thoughts from today's discussion?
Well, it's fascinating, but it's very difficult from my point of view to judge what's happening, because I've been here 3 years and I've been watching Erdogan dealing with Putin, in some ways very cleverly, but in some ways that maddens NATO members, because, you know, Turkey bought the S-400 missile system and incurred sanctions from America for doing so from Putin, and seems to be going closer to Putin. And yet now recently we're seeing them swing back a bit. And what's fascinating to me is to watch what is Erdogan playing at, and how clever is he in his dealings, both with Putin, but also the wider and region and NATO alliance. And I think he wants his cake and eat it. He wants a bit of everything. He wants to make money. He wants to have pipelines coming through, and yet he doesn't want to actually fight Russia. I think he wants to deal with Putin and keep him at bay, but deal with him. And so what it was very interesting in the Karabakh War was, after it ended with Russia, getting a nice peacekeeping position, Turkey was talking about, well, let's put roads through, let's put railways through, let's have a win-win situation for everyone. And so I think that is how Erdogan sees things. He will want to do this canal for his own benefit, but he will persuade Russia with a bit of saber rattling, which I think tearing up the Montreux Convention was Erdogan saying to Russia, we can threaten you if you, if you're going to be difficult, but he's never going to go quite that far. He's going to say, let's sit down and talk and do a deal. So I think he's quite clever in handling Putin. He stood up to him in Libya. He stood up to him in Syria. He got Putin to allow him to support Azerbaijan, which surprised me. I was very surprised that Russia allowed Azerbaijan to go as far as they did go. And a lot of that is Erdogan's negotiation with Putin, I think. But now he's I think pedaling back a bit because of the Biden administration. So Erdogan is now, talking to Ukraine, threatening to tear up the Montreux Convention. I think that's all saber rattling to keep Putin on edge a bit. But in the end, who comes out on top? I think perhaps Putin's still the better chess player. But I just have to keep watching because I don't really know. So that's my job, is just to watch every move and keep writing as it happens.
Well, there's no better place to be than with an apartment overlooking the Bosphorus and keeping an eye on east and west. So I'm going to turn the floor over to let Matt and Mitat say a few closing words, and we're going to end today's discussion. So I will let you have the final, their final comments. Mitat?
Yeah, from Carlotta's point, in fact, that's true. For example, Erdogan is very aware of the fact that when he's selling all those drones to Ukraine or Azerbaijan and to conduct operation against those separatist groups or to get back this Karabakh to Azerbaijan, of course he's aware of those realities, and Turkey is very actively pushing Russia time to time to the corner. But on the other hand, they managed to get together and to find some ways and try to look at the full side of the bottle and to find some ways and means. But this is a kind of a threatening kind of a relationship. There is a limit and limits of this kind of a relationship. And if you are playing with such a kind of a great power too much on that issues, then you will pay a kind of a bill. We have some experiences in different areas. Then Turkey reminds, or Erdogan reminds, that Turkey is a NATO member country or a Western ally. But although your Western allies and NATO member allies are just questioning your role, and this is not working and adding Turkey's value comparing with the previous period. This is not easy for a Turkish academic as well to make analysis of Turkish foreign policy making and security apparatus just because of those habits. The rationale is much more different than the previous period, and this is the reason why Turkey is swinging from one side to the another in a day, and therefore I don't want to make some comments and of course direct results of those attitudes, but we'll see. And most probably it's going to be issue for next 2 years, maybe more, to discuss not only the Canal, but the Montreux and Turkey's relations with NATO allies as well as Russia. But it seems that Turkey is reminding its NATO member country and roles within NATO as well. let's see.
I think we will see. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Carlotta that I think that President Erdogan is sending a warning to President Putin. Crimea is a sore spot, obviously, for Turkey, given the Turkic Crimeans who've had so much difficulty under Moscow. And I think he probably intends or hopes that the Biden administration will see that by putting these ideas out there about Montreux, that should be seen as something positive in today's Washington, and that by cozying up to Ukraine, that definitely should be appreciated by a Joe Biden who was President Obama's point person for responding to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. I'm not sure that that's getting through in Washington. In fact, I'm pretty confident it isn't, but I think that's what he's trying to do. And that's in the context of a whole series of agreements over the last year or so on military technological cooperation between Turkey and Ukraine in terms of Ukraine acquiring or buying, simple word, buying Turkey's drone technologies and stealth corvette naval vessel technologies. And then Turkey and Ukraine together maybe developing a new jet engine that could be used with Turkish military aircraft. I think Erdogan believes that that's something that should appeal to this particular American president, Joe Biden, given Biden's past. And so I hope that this whole question about, oh my goodness, is Turkey together with the US planning a war against Russia? I hope that'll go away. That's ridiculous. There's no such possibility that that's going to happen. But what I really do hope, though, is that, again, that Washington will appreciate that Turkey's drone capabilities, that its consideration also of taking another look at Montreux, even if that is motivated by some venial economic considerations, and then that Turkey's role in Nagorno-Karabakh will be seen not, or in Azerbaijan, I don't mean support for Azerbaijan militarily, but I mean its presence, its peacekeeping presence together with Russia will be seen as eyes and ears of NATO on the ground, countering Russia's peacekeeping operation. I hope that will be appreciated. All of these things will be appreciated as assets for all of NATO. And I know that's not happening in Washington right now, and I think that's a huge mistake. And maybe Turkey has stimulated, maybe not by design, but a very interesting debate about whether we should all think beyond the constructs of a nearly 100-year-old agreement that served its purpose in 1936, but maybe is becoming obsolete.
Well, there's no way to know. And I would say that the title of our event today is Guardians of the Straits. And I don't think we'll reconvene in 2 years' time and see who's right and how much progress there is in the canal, and maybe we'll have a boat trip down the new bypass canal and celebrate. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for everyone watching our event today. We'll be posting it online afterwards, and appreciate. Thank you, Carlotta, for taking the time to be with us, Mitat and Ambassador Bryza. So we'll see you again. All the best to everyone.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Thanks, President Glenn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bryza.
Great to be